Why does sitting decrease blood flow? Good day. Today, I'll be discussing a critical physiological phenomenon that affects millions of people daily. Prolonged sitting leads to decreased circulation of blood in the body. The movement of blood throughout the body represents a critical element of human existence. The cardiovascular system moves about 5 liters of blood throughout the body on a continuous basis to supply tissues with oxygen and nutrients and to clear metabolic waste products. This complex process depends on efficient circulation supported by multiple physiological systems. Today's society exhibits high levels of sedentary behavior across desks, vehicles, and couches, which makes studying sitting's impact on our circulatory health crucial. Adults typically sit for 6 to 8 hours per day, which presents important implications for their health. We need to analyze how sitting affects blood circulation through physiological mechanisms and understand the health implications from this decrease in blood flow. 3. Human physiology developed with movement as its main function rather than prolonged sitting. Sitting triggers multiple physiological changes which have direct effects on blood circulation. An upright sitting posture causes hydrostatic pressure to rise in the lower extremities, while specifically affecting the popliteal and femoral veins. An upright sitting position results in a large venous pressure gradient ranging from 80 to 100 millimeters of mercury between the feet and the right atrium, which exceeds the 10 to 15 millimeters of mercury gradient seen during a horizontal position. 2. Venous stasis stands as the primary factor in this context. The placement of knees and hips while sitting produces mechanical compression on the popliteal and femoral veins. The mechanical compression results in a decrease of up to 40% in the cross-sectional area of these vessels, which leads to higher resistance to venous return. 3. Muscle inactivity. The skeletal muscle pump remains inactive during extended periods of sitting, with calf muscles being the primary affected area. The normal action of these muscles involves contracting during movement, which helps compress deep veins and push blood upward against gravity through one-way valves. Venous return decreases by 50% when the pumping action from muscle movement is absent compared to venous return during regular standing activities. 4. Endothelial dysfunction. Extended immobility causes temporary endothelial dysfunction. The endothelial cells that line our blood vessels generate nitric oxide, NO, which functions as a powerful vasodilator. A person who sits for only 1 to 2 hours experiences a 30% drop in nitric oxide production, which leads to reduced vasodilation ability and higher peripheral resistance. 5. Impaired lower limb perfusion. Sitting generates intramuscular pressure of about 30 millimeters of mercury in gluteal muscles, which surpasses capillary pressure in certain areas. When seated, mechanical compression causes tissue perfusion to drop by as much as 50% compared to when standing. 6. Altered sympathetic tone. Sustained sitting time changes the autonomic nervous system equilibrium by increasing sympathetic activity. Alpha. Adrenergic-mediated vasoconstriction raises peripheral vascular resistance, which then leads to further degradation of microcirculation. 7. Impaired lymphatic drainage. Without a central pump, the lymphatic system depends on both muscular contractions and respiratory movements to function properly. When sitting, people experience a 40% reduction in lymphatic flow through their lower limbs, which leads to fluid buildup and tissue swelling. The combined effects of these mechanisms cause reduced venous return and an increase in peripheral resistance, which damages microcirculation, specifically in the lower extremities and pelvic area. Consequences. 2. Prolonged sitting induces hemodynamic changes which result in multiple negative health effects. Venous thromboembolism. VE. Extended sitting reduces blood flow speed in the legs and raises deep vein thrombosis, DVT, risk by 2 to 3 times. The combination of hypercoagulability, endothelial damage, and hemodynamic alterations, according to Fierco's triad, produces optimal conditions for thrombus development, especially in vulnerable people. 2. Chronic venous insufficiency. CVI venous stasis that occurs repeatedly can harm the venous valves, which results in valvular incompetence and the development of chronic venous insufficiency. The conditions develop into edema and skin alterations that can progress to venous ulceration during severe instances. 3. Peripheral arterial disease progression. People who suffer from peripheral arterial disease experience worsened tissue oxygen deprivation and faster disease progression when their blood flow reduces from sitting. 4. Metabolic derangements. Skeletal muscles experience a 40% drop in glucose absorption after sitting for 1 hour due to decreased blood flow. Postprandial hyperglycemia and insulin resistance arise from this process, which leads to development of metabolic syndrome. 5. Endothelial dysfunction. Prolonged sitting leads to a chronic decrease in shear stress along vessel walls that triggers endothelial cells to develop pro-inflammatory and prothrombotic characteristics. Prolonged periods of sitting lead to faster development of atherosclerosis, which raises cardiovascular risk levels. 6. Pelvic congestion. The act of sitting generates pressure on pelvic blood vessels, which may result in pelvic congestion syndrome that manifests as continuous pain and swollen pelvic veins. Impaired cognitive function. Although it is not immediately obvious, sitting can decrease blood flow to the lower limbs, which leads to altered cerebral blood flow regulation and potential cognitive function decline during extended periods of inactivity. 8. Lymphedema. When lymphatic drainage fails proper function, it results in buildup of interstitial fluid, which shows more prominently in people who already have lymphatic insufficiency. The physiological effects of sitting reveal its nature as a stressor with important effects on hemodynamics rather than a passive activity. Conclusion: 0. Sitting leads to a cascade of hemodynamic changes that substantially decrease blood circulation throughout the body. The hemodynamic alterations that occur during sitting involve mechanical compression of major vessels, along with muscle pump inactivation and endothelial dysfunction, which produces an altered sympathetic tone. Decreased blood circulation triggers multiple adverse health effects, including venous thromboembolism and metabolic and endothelial dysfunction. The knowledge of these mechanisms clarifies how prolonged sitting emerges as an independent cardiovascular disease risk factor regardless of other physical activity levels. Medical evaluations of sedentary patients with circulatory issues must account for hemodynamic effects while emphasizing the need for movement breaks within sedentary routines. The human body functions best with movement because extended sitting produces hemodynamic effects which emphasize the need for periodic position changes and physical activity to sustain proper blood circulation and overall health. Thank you for watching, and I see you in the next one.